In the world of professional wrestling, some characters are designed to be forgotten. They're the monsters of the week, the cartoon villains who make the hero look strong before they just fade away. They are, by design, disposable. But what happens when the man behind the monster is treated just as disposably? What happens when a company builds an icon, makes a fortune from his image, and then discards the human being inside, leaving him to face a reality far more horrifying than any script? This isn't a story about a fictional monster. This is the story of a man from Mississippi, handed a character so steeped in racist caricature, it's shocking to look back on. A man who drew massive crowds and sold out arenas, only to be allegedly paid a fraction of his worth. It's a story of exploitation, betrayal, and a tragic, undignified end that modern wrestling wants you to forget. This is the story of James Harris, and this is the shameful, untold story of Kamala, the Ugandan giant. He was one of the most terrifying characters in wrestling history, a giant from the jungles of Uganda who struck fear into fans and opponents alike. But the man behind the paint, James Harris, was a soft-spoken truck driver from Mississippi, and his greatest horror wasn't found in the ring. It was a story of exploitation, stolen wages, and a tragic end that Vince McMahon and the WWE would rather you forget. Before the loincloth, the spear, and the eerie painted symbols, there was James Harris, born in Senatobia, Mississippi on May 28, 1950. To understand the character he became, you have to understand the world that made the man. This was the Jim Crow South, a world of systemic poverty and crushing racial inequality. Harris's life was marked by tragedy right from the start. When he was just 4 years old, his father was shot and killed during a dice game, leaving his mother to raise him and his sisters in profound hardship. The family had nothing, no safety net, just a daily struggle for survival. From a young age, James worked as a sharecropper, toiling in fields designed to trap black families in a cycle of debt. He left school in the 9th grade. It seemed his path was set. For a young, poor black man in rural Mississippi, the options were brutally limited. He fell into petty crime, and by 1967, local police suggested it might be best for him to leave town. He fled, first to Florida to pick fruit, then eventually up to Michigan, working any job he could find, most notably driving trucks. He was a towering figure, standing a legitimate 6'7" and weighing nearly 400 pounds, but he had no dreams of becoming a wrestler. He was just a man trying to survive. In Michigan, he crossed paths with the legendary wrestler Bobo Brazil, who saw the immense potential in the giant kid from Mississippi. Brazil told him he could make real money in wrestling. For James Harris, who had known nothing but poverty, it wasn't about fame, it was about a paycheck. His body was his only real asset, and he was ready to use it. He started his career in 1978, wrestling under names like Sugar Bear Harris and the Mississippi Mauler. He found some success, even traveling to Europe, but he wasn't a breakout star. In 1982, after breaking his ankle, he returned to Mississippi. His career stalled. He was back where he started, considering giving it all up. But a chance encounter would change his life and wrestling history forever. While visiting a friend at the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis, Tennessee, he was spotted by the local territory's promoter, Jerry the King Lawler. Lawler saw what Bobo Brazil had seen, a mountain of a man who could be a promoter's dream. But Lawler had a very specific and deeply problematic vision. In the territorial wrestling days of the early 80s, promoters needed villains, or heels, who could generate real heat from the audience, making them pay to see the local hero finally beat the monster. Jerry Lawler, along with promoter Jerry Jarrett, looked at James Harris and saw an opportunity. They saw something primal, something exotic, something they could mold into the ultimate spectacle. The idea they pitched was a character named Kamala, later tweaked to Kamala. The gimmick was a so-called Ugandan headhunter, a savage supposedly discovered in the African jungle and a former bodyguard for the infamous dictator Idi Amin. The whole presentation was a mashup of racist stereotypes drawn from images in National Geographic and pop culture depictions of Africa. They painted his face in a tribal pattern, with 2 stars on his chest and a moon on his belly. He wrestled barefoot in a loincloth, entering the ring with an African mask and a spear. To complete the act, Lawler and Jarrett told Harris that Kamala could not speak English. He was to communicate only through grunts and by slapping his belly, and to wrestle not with skill, but like a wild animal. To protect the illusion, or kayfabe, James Harris was forced to live the gimmick. He had to stay silent in public in Memphis. The promotional videos that introduced him were just as fake. One infamous vignette, meant to show him emerging from a steamy jungle, was actually filmed on Jerry Jarrett's Tennessee farm, with dry ice creating the jungle steam. The character was an immediate hit. Kamala debuted in the Continental Wrestling Association in May 1982 and sold out the Mid-South Coliseum for his match against Lawler. He was terrifying, unpredictable, and unlike anything fans had seen. He quickly became the region's top monster, solidifying his status in a blistering feud with Lawler. While some writers, even then, criticized the gimmick as racially insensitive, its popularity was undeniable. James Harris, a man who grew up in the Jim Crow South, was now portraying a racist caricature for the entertainment of largely white audiences. He later said he enjoyed being an entertainer and didn't mind the gimmick, but the arrangement was clear. The more he leaned into the savage persona, the more money everyone made. News of this new attraction spread fast. Soon, the biggest show in the world came calling. Vince McMahon and the World Wrestling Federation wanted the Ugandan giant. In 1984, Kamala debuted in the WWF. Vince McMahon was taking his company national, collecting the most colorful characters for his rock and wrestling circus. Managed by classy Freddie Blassie and a masked handler named Friday, Kamala was a perfect fit. He was immediately pushed as an unstoppable monster. He feuded with another giant, Andre the Giant, in a spectacular series of matches. But the absolute peak of his career came in late 1986 and early 1987. For several months, Kamala was the primary challenger for the WWF World Heavyweight Champion, the immortal Hulk Hogan. This was the main event. Hogan vs. Kamala headlined shows across the country, including sold-out events at Madison Square Garden. To the fans, Kamala was a legitimate threat to Hulkamania. He was a certified main event draw. As Hogan himself reportedly told Harris, "Brother, we're putting asses in the seats. I hope you're getting your money, because I'm getting mine." But here's where the story takes a dark turn. At the very peak of his fame, Harris was allegedly being paid a pittance compared to the men he was drawing crowds with. In interviews years later, Harris recounted the frustrating reality of his pay. While a main event against Hogan might net him $4,000 or $5,000, his pay would plummet to just a few $100s for other matches on the same grueling weekly schedule. The money, he claimed, kept going down, even as arenas stayed full. He paid for his own rental car and hotels, standard for WWF's independent contractors, but a brutal expense on inconsistent pay. Frustrated that he couldn't make a decent living despite being a headliner, Harris abruptly left the WWF in September 1987. It was a pattern that would define his career. He was a valuable attraction, but one Vince McMahon seemed intent on getting as cheaply as possible. The monster was a main eventer, but the man was treated as expendable. After leaving the WWF, James Harris bounced around, working in Mexico and Japan. But the allure of the WWF's global stage was always there. In May 1992, he returned, this time managed by Harvey Whippleman and his handler, Kim Chi. According to Harris, the WWF took out an insurance policy this time, reportedly placing 15% of his pay into an escrow account to prevent him from walking out over money again. He was immediately thrust back into the spotlight, feuding with stars like The Ultimate Warrior and Randy Savage. But his most memorable feud from this era was against The Undertaker. This was a clash of titans, a perfect foil of the primitive Kamala against the supernatural Undertaker. Their storyline culminated at SummerSlam 1992 in front of over 80,000 fans at Wembley Stadium in London. This match became a major point of grievance for Harris. For his part, in a featured match on a massive pay-per-view, Harris claimed he was paid just $13,000. According to Harris, he later discovered, allegedly from payroll documents seen by another wrestler, that his opponent, The Undertaker, was paid $500,000 for the show. While that $500,000 figure has been disputed, the alleged disparity was stark and, for Harris, deeply insulting. He felt cheated. The feud led to the first ever televised casket match at Survivor Series in November 1992, where The Undertaker defeated Kamala, literally nailing the coffin shut on his monster persona. Following this, the WWF attempted a bizarre character shift, turning Kamala into a good guy. His former manager, Reverend Slick, tried to humanize him in comedic skits that saw him learn to go bowling. The once terrifying monster was now a comedy act, pinning opponents backward because he was supposedly too simple-minded to win correctly. For James Harris, this was the ultimate indignity. His character was now a joke. The pay remained low, the work was grueling, and then, in July 1993, tragedy struck. Harris was on tour when he got a call. His youngest sister had been murdered. According to his own account, he called the WWF office and was told by Linda McMahon he could go home. He left the tour for the funeral. When he returned, he said, he was fired. He had lost his sister, his niece, also killed in the incident, and his job all at once. The company that likely generated millions from his work had, according to him, cut him loose at his lowest moment. All that was left was the escrow money the WWF had withheld, about $17,000. With that, he bought a truck and went back to the only other work he knew. The Ugandan giant was once again just James Harris, a truck driver from Mississippi, left with nothing but scars. Life after wrestling was unforgiving. James Harris tried to make a living driving his truck, but the years of physical punishment had taken a devastating toll. He was diagnosed with diabetes in 1992, but had neglected to manage it properly while on the road. As an independent contractor, he had no company health insurance. In one interview, he even alleged that WWE forced him to wrestle barefoot under threat of fines, even after he developed diabetes-induced neuropathy, which causes severe nerve damage in the feet. His health spiraled. In November 2011, the consequences became irreversible. Doctors had to amputate his left leg below the knee due to complications from diabetes. 5 months later, in April 2012, they took his right leg. The man who once terrorized arenas was now confined to a wheelchair, a double amputee. The financial ruin was just as complete. He lived in the same small Mississippi town he had once tried to escape, surviving on disability checks. To make extra money, he built and sold handmade wooden chairs. Imagine that. A man who performed in front of 80,000 people at Wembley was now selling chairs for $50 a piece just to get by, while the WWE, a billion-dollar corporation, could still profit from his likeness on their streaming network and through merchandise. His struggles became a symbol of the dark side of the business. In 2016, Harris joined a class action lawsuit filed against WWE by over 50 former wrestlers, alleging the company concealed the risks of neurological injuries and misclassified them as independent contractors to avoid paying for health care. The lawsuit was ultimately dismissed in 2018, but Harris's participation allegedly put him on the outs with the company. His health continued to fail. In 2017, he underwent life-saving emergency surgery to clear fluid from his heart and lungs. He survived, but the end was near. On August 9, 2020, James Harris died at the age of 70. He had been hospitalized with complications from diabetes after testing positive for COVID-19 and ultimately suffered a cardiac arrest. The man behind the monster was gone. What is the legacy of Kamala? For a generation of fans, he was the perfect monster heel. He was legitimately scary, believable, and an essential villain who helped create iconic moments of the 80s wrestling boom. He did his job exceptionally well. The stars and moon painted on his stomach are etched into the memories of millions. But the legacy of James Harris is far more complicated and far more important. His story is a cautionary tale. It's the story of a man from the Jim Crow South who took the only opportunity he thought he had, even if it meant becoming a racial caricature. It's the story of an entertainer who drew huge money but was allegedly paid a fraction of what his white counterparts earned. And it's the story of a system, personified by Vince McMahon, that often prioritizes profit above all else. A system that can take a man's body, use it until it breaks, and then discard him with no safety net, no health care, and no dignity. The firing in the end wasn't one single moment. The shame was in the entire process. It was in creating a racist gimmick for profit. It was in the alleged wage theft and financial exploitation. It was in turning a terrifying monster into a neutered comedy act. And it was in the abandonment of the man once his body gave out and he could no longer serve his purpose. The story of James Harris is one that the polished, corporate version of wrestling history seems designed to make you forget. It pulls back the curtain on the ugly truth behind the spectacle. It shows that for some, the dream of becoming a WWE superstar isn't a story of fame and fortune, but a nightmare of exploitation that ends in poverty, amputation, and a legacy left to be debated long after you're gone. The Ugandan giant may have been fiction, but the tragedy of James Harris was painfully, shamefully real. If you believe these stories need to be told, please like this video, subscribe for more deep dives into wrestling history, and share this with another fan who needs to know the truth behind the paint.